Hello, Johnny from Eurogamer here, and this is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Chances are you've already had a chance to view the 15 minutes of gameplay streamed as part of EA Play here in Los Angeles. Maybe you even caught Ian's feature on things we noticed in the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order gameplay. I was able to catch a special presentation at EA Play showing an extended version of the original demo being played live, and while I sadly can't show you the footage itself, it's given me a bunch of additional details to share with you. So here, without any further ado, come 11 thoughts on the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order extended gameplay. Firstly, there's more than a little bit of Uncharted in this game. The demo we saw started out with Cal swimming through a river on Kashyyyk, making his way toward a couple of Imperial walkers, both of them covered in vines and moss. I'm not sure whether that's because they'd been on Kashyyyk for a long time, or whether it was a really rubbish attempt at camouflage, but it was cool nonetheless. Anyway, Cal decided to take over one of these walkers, and not having access to a trusty grappling hook like Luke Skywalker, he started climbing up the vines. The platforming section that followed was really like Shadow of the Colossus meets Uncharted, and it was pretty cool. Not groundbreaking by any means, this is an action-adventure game after all, but it was a neat way of getting a sense of just how big these hulking great machines really are. And of course, it was not long before Cal got on top of the AT-AT, making his way inside and seizing control of the walker for himself, leading neatly onto our next point from the extended demo. There are vehicle sections. After booting up the walker, Cal sat himself down in the pilot's seat with BD, his trusty and frankly adorable droid, taking up a position as his co-pilot. The camera itself was situated behind them, so you could watch them react to the havoc they were raking, and to be honest, I thought that was a really nice touch. It meant the view outside was a bit letterboxed, admittedly, but again it reinforced the sheer size of these machines, emphasising their destructive potential. In terms of said destructive potential, the AT-AT comes equipped with both light and heavy lasers. The heavy lasers are the punchy shots you'll be very much used to from the films, whereas the light lasers are smaller cannons with a much more rapid rate of fire, although they are prone to overheating if you rely on them too heavily. The romp through the level lasted a couple of minutes, during which Cal and BD destroyed another walker, an AT-ST, a shuttle, a whole bunch of stormtroopers, and a bridge blocking the way, showing again that destructive environments are very much part of the experience in Jedi Fallen Order. Sadly, in taking out that shuttle I mentioned, Cal also managed to total his own walker, so he was on foot thereafter. Still, being on foot, we did at least get to have a good look at the combat in Fallen Order, and my next thought on the extended gameplay is that there really is a lot of Sekiro in this game, isn't there? As you've almost certainly clocked for yourself, evading attacks and timing your blocks well are vitally important in Fallen Order, but the demo really brought that home. What I gleaned from getting a closer look at the combat is that, Jedi or no, you can get staggered pretty easily in this game if your timing is off, and while I don't think it's going to be quite as exacting as From Software's Shinobi game, combat in Fallen Order will definitely put the self-same skills to the test. It will also afford you some similar opportunities to do damage. There was one moment when Cal was fighting a massive spider that really closely resembled a perfect counter from Sekiro, letting Cal bat a big attack out of the way like it was nothing before delivering a devastating coup de grace against his multi-limbed adversary. If you ask me, it's a really smart decision to build the combat like this. It makes you feel powerful, which is good and right when you're playing as a Jedi, but Fallen Order also makes sure you never feel completely godlike. With some of the enemies presenting a more significant challenge, it should hopefully make for a more substantial combat experience. So yeah, the combat is solid, but I think what's really going to make or break the experience here is how numerous enemies are and how far apart they're spaced. In The Force Unleashed, for example, there were lots of sections in which you tottered down a corridor, taking out the occasional pocket of enemies in 1s or 2s, and that, for me, sucked the fun out of the experience. So seeing how Respawn handles enemy distribution in the finished game should be pretty interesting. Anyway, while we're on the subject of combat, let's talk about the Force abilities, because they really have me wondering about what's going to happen to Cal. As you will have seen already, there's Force Push and Force Pull, both pretty standard, and there's an ability called Force Slow, where you can slow and even freeze certain objects and enemies for a period, helping you navigate puzzles or deal with a few of the lesser adversaries before tackling an especially tricky one. Now, we also saw Cal using Force Pull in order to yank someone directly onto his lightsaber. Force pulling an enemy towards you, by the way, puts them in a Force-powered chokehold. At one point, the guy playing our demo Force pulled an enemy toward him, threw the same enemy off a ledge, Force slowed that enemy as he made his way down himself, and then Force pulled the enemy back toward him again before bunging him finally at a giant spider. If that all sounded really complicated, I'm sorry, I wish I could show you the footage, but I mention this to emphasise that the Force powers are all very cool, and you're clearly meant to use them in tandem with one another, but at points, it felt pretty full on. And I'm not saying that's a problem. In fact, the creativity you can employ in choosing how to take out your enemies is awesome, but it does feel a lot more dark side than it does light. There's a flourish to the combat in Fallen Order that I'm not really used to seeing from the Jedi, who, at least in my opinion, are much more functional in their fighting style than the more vindictive Sith. And that has me wondering, is Cal going to struggle with temptation from the dark side during Fallen Order? He's got a shock of ginger hair, and this game is set before the original trilogy, so is he in fact the father of Domhnall Gleeson's character General Hux from the sequels? Big questions to be asking on the basis of the Force powers being a bit spicy, I know, but it's still kind of interesting. Anyway, back to the extended demo, because one of the other things it showed us in greater detail is BD the droid, because it turns out he's not just an adorable map projector, he's really useful in other ways too. When Cal needed to take over the Imperial Walker, for example, BD was given the chance to distract the two pilots by jumping up between them and going beep boop. It was contextual, suggesting BD will only be able to provide a distraction in certain circumstances rather than all the time, but it was still pretty great. Now, you might have noticed in the demo that there's a little numbered icon next to the health bar in Fallen Order, and it transpires that relates to BD as well, because he can heal you up. At Cal's request, BD was able to refill his health bar, using up one of his limited charges in order to restore some vitality to his Jedi friend / steed. I'm not sure how many charges BD can hold or how they're replenished, but it's a neat mechanic either way. BD can also be directed to scan objects in the environment, after which you get a bit of flavor text telling you exactly what it is you just scanned. Not functionally super important, but a neat bit of extra world building for those who are especially curious. BD's talents don't end there, mind you, because he can also be upgraded with new abilities when you find spare parts in the world. In our demo, for example, Cal gave BD the ability to overcharge Imperial tech, effectively allowing him to manipulate certain mechanical elements in the environment. This ability in particular is typically used to access new areas, which is especially interesting in light of our next point, which is that you can revisit previously visited locations. Part of the demo introduced us to Cal's ship and crew. Inside the ship you can access a planetary map which looks a bit like BD's local map, and you can use that to choose to return to a planet. It's nice that you can go back and re-explore favourite locations, but if I had to put money on it, I'd say BD's abilities will enable you to reach previously inaccessible locations on those planets once you've upgraded your robotic pal a bit more, which frankly is great for replayability. The next thought I had from the extended demo was that Fallen Order looks really nice, but some of the character face animations are pretty stiff. It's not nightmarish, don't get me wrong, it's just like a little bit off, and hopefully that's something they'll change before the game comes out. Especially, to be honest, the Wookiee, because the one we saw in the demo, it frankly looks haunted. Sorry. The next thing we saw that wasn't in the streamed demo is that you can talk to NPCs outside of cutscenes, which is a nice way to get a little extra out of characters in order to understand their history and their motivations. And there are even dialogue choices. From what we saw though, these are more like the options you got in Titanfall 2 than, say, Mass Effect or Dragon Age, so don't suddenly start expecting a full-blown RPG or anything of that sort. Just 2 things left on our list of bits we saw from the extended demo here at E3, and the first concerns the environments. Specifically, that Fallen Order does a really nice job of transitioning from one area to another. We saw Cal go from wide exteriors to the cramped innards of a walker, and from fairly twisty outdoor paths to sudden expanses with shelves and big plateaus. And some of these transitions were covered by cutscenes, sure, but others were really natural, with the camera panning round to show off the new area, and I thought that was a really nice touch. It adds a cinematic element and a really pleasing sense of flow to proceedings, and I'll also say I quite like the environmental puzzly bits. And very finally, let's talk about the skill tree. Notably, we didn't get to have a look at the skill tree itself during the streamed demo, and, well, to be honest, didn't get a look at it in the extended one either, but we did get a look at what it looks like when you first open the skill tree, and now we understand how spending skill points actually works. Unlike other games in which you earn a skill point and immediately get to spend it, in Fallen Order you have to travel to one of a bunch of specific locations scattered about the world. When you reach one of these, Cal kneels down and enters a meditative state, at which point the world transitions into a grey background with lots of circles and dots, which I'm assuming is some kind of graphical interpretation of the Force. Presumably the dots are the bits at which you can spend your hard-won skill points, but as I say, the demo didn't explore that any further. What I can say though is that it looks a lot like this hoarding they had at the event, and it's quite pretty. Anyway, those were 11 thoughts we had about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order's extended gameplay demo, but what do you think? Are you looking forward to Respawn's take on the Star Wars universe, or is your enthusiasm far, far away? Let us know in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, there are loads more from Eurogamer for you to watch. Some of them should be on screen now, so do give one of those a click. Do like and subscribe so you don't miss anything else from Eurogamer, because we're going to have loads coming out over the course of E3. But most importantly, thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.
Need to slice this.